So when I say I was afraid of everything, I was afraid of everything. Anything that could cause death, I was afraid of. I was terrified. I couldn't climb up on a ladder. I could hardly climb up on a 2-step ladder or onto a chair. I was just terrified of heights and of other things. But I went to a ladies' retreat, and there was a zip line at the ladies' retreat. At the time, it was the longest in Idaho. It may still be, I don't know. But so to do the zip line, you had to climb up a tree like, I don't know, maybe 30 feet. And then you climbed out on this tiny little, it seemed like a postage stamp sized platform, and they hooked you up and you went across on the zip line. Well, the ladies that I had from my church that went to that retreat with me, it was a women's retreat. They all decided they were going to do the zip line. And my social anxiety kicked in, and I'm like, I can't look stupid.
I can't say no.
I can't say no, so I have to do the zip line, but how in the world am I going to do this zip line? And so the closer I got for my time to do it, I was terrified and shaking, but I'm like, I also have a very, very strong, stubborn streak that has stood me in good stead over the years. And this was one of those moments, because I'm like, okay, I will do it. So they hooked me up. I signed my life away on the form that said I won't sue them to death if I die. And I climbed up the tree, and that part wasn't bad. But as soon as I got on the platform, I started having panic attacks, and I was paralyzed. I could not move my body at all. Nothing. I was hugging the tree, and I could not move. If anybody's ever experienced panic attack where you are paralyzed, it was complete paralysis. I couldn't move. And the man that was up there helping and hooking me up, he was very kind. And he's like, there's only 2 ways to get down. You can climb back down the tree. And I knew there was no way I could do that. He's like, or you can do the zip line. And finally he said, well, you can sit down if that would be easier. You can sit down and scoot over the edge as opposed to stepping off.
Because you had to go off yourself, right? They couldn't push you off or help you.
They would not push you. You had to do it on your own. You had to make the choice and do it. And so finally I'm sitting down there, and I'm like, okay, God, here we go. And I pushed myself off the platform and went zipping along. And I share in the book that I had a moment of stubbornness where I made a Superman pose in defiance, and then I went back to sobbing my eyes out. But I got to the other side and survived, obviously. And once they unhooked me, I had started crying. I had started crying when I was having the panic attacks, but I cried for hours. I literally could not stop crying, and I didn't know why. I didn't know what had happened, and why it was that why I was crying.
Because you weren't an overly emotional person.
No. I say I cry once a year just to make sure everything works. I don't cry real often. But that time I couldn't stop, and I cried for hours and hours. And one of the things that came out of that is I overcame my fear of heights, because I did it, and all of a sudden I wasn't afraid of heights anymore. I could walk along the edge of a cliff. I could climb ladders. I don't have that fear of heights anymore. But
Dad could take you on his 4-wheeling adventures up the side of a cliff.
Well, yeah, those are still frightening to a normal, healthy person. But I'm not afraid of the heights part of it anymore. But what came out of that is facing one of my worst fears. Started all my other fears and phobias just started melting away. I could kill a spider with my bare hand and not run away shrieking, finding someone to kill a minuscule spider.
Well, I'll admit fear on that one. I'll call you to kill the spider.
That'll work.
But that comes from being bitten and getting cellulitis and almost losing my arm.
Yes, that's a different story. But yeah, and plugging things in and not having to say the sinner's prayer before doing everything. I started overcoming and my goal is to overcome every phobia that I have. Every single one. And there's still some that are lingering, but one by one, as I as I realize them, I face them, and I am determined to overcome all of my phobias, because phobias held me captive for way too many years.
There's a lot of power in facing your
yes,
fears.
there is a lot of power.
That's actually one of the reasons I have a tattoo is I was needle phobic. You say in the book, like, you couldn't hear someone curse or say bad words.
Right.
You had to scrub your mind out or things like that. I think one of the only times I ever let a bad word out around you was actually that spider bite I referenced. We were in the hospital and they had to draw blood, and they had to draw it from one arm, then the other, then go back to the other arm. And I think you were laughing just out of being nervous.
Yeah, I was nervous.
But it's like, Mom, it's not funny. And I swore at you. But it's like, I didn't want to live in that fear. So part of it was like, there was a lot of meaning involved in it, but part of it was actually, okay, I'm afraid of needles. Let me go get it hundreds and hundreds of times just so I can force myself to go face it. And
fortunately for you, because allergy shots.
yeah, now I get allergy shots, and the past 4 or 5 times I've gotten my blood drawn, it hasn't affected me. But I remember for a long time, even just the sight of the needle, they had to use smelling salts to keep me up.
I remember that.
I did not do well with needles.
Yeah, overcoming one fear helps the whole rest of your life. It gives you power. It takes your power back from that object.
I want to say it's called, have you heard of the parietal distribution? So most people think of like a normal distribution as like a bell curve where it's really shallow on the ends, and then there's a normal average in the middle. The parietal distribution is almost exponential. It's kind of like the hardest part is that first step. And they see this in a lot of stuff. And I may have the word wrong. It might not be parietal. But what I'm referring to is things typically accelerate once you start. So you'll see this in authors. Once they've written their first book, that hardest part, almost nobody's written a book. But once you've written one book, you're much more likely to write a second. Once you've written 2, you're much more likely. And so it's just getting that first step. And you see that with facing fears. When you face that first fear, now all of a sudden you find you have the courage, because the internal story is, I don't have to be afraid of everything. I do have courage. I can face this first thing. Now I have strength to face more and more and more and more.
Right. Yeah, it does. It cascades and it builds, and to find freedom is so incredible. It's just really incredible, that freedom that comes from not having to live fearful of everything.